Good afternoon, everyone. Well, once I just want to thank everybody for being here. My name is Camille Christina Terry. I am the co-chapter lead for Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability Los Angeles, and also the CEO and co-founder of Charger Health. And yeah, today I'm very excited for the conversation that we're going to have in regards to how to turn being underestimated into an advantage, a book club discussion. Go ahead, next slide, please. So today with our agenda, we're gonna go over just some Zoom etiquette. I know we've been in this Zoom life for the last like 8 months. It's almost a year now. That's kind of wild. But we'll still go over the Zoom room etiquette. We're gonna go over some of the book summary. One of the things is if you didn't read the book completely, totally okay. The discussion that we have here is really about this larger concept that was presented in the book. So we'll do some of the book's summary, and then we'll go into our discussion, breakout sessions. So we'll have our first session, which we're gonna touch on 3 different topics. We'll come back, do a share out, and then we'll have another session where we'll go into 3 different questions as well. Your facilitators that are in the room has the discussion questions, so you'll also be able to see that once we get into the rooms. And then, yeah, we'll do a wrap up. And just thank y'all for being here. Next slide, please. And so if you're unfamiliar with Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, and it's an amazing network of professionals that are looking to help women grow within the green economy. So if you're not necessarily in this industry, it's a great place for you to learn more about the industry as well as connect with folks within the industry. We host monthly events, currently all virtual. We do have an annual mentorship program. And then we also have our WCS Talks, which is a TED-style conference that we do in co-sponsorship with Google. That'll be coming up towards the end of this year. Next slide, please. And so just some upcoming events to keep on your calendar. Like I said, our WCS Talks is gonna be November 7th, so quickly coming up. November 12th, we actually have Negotiate Like a CEO. It was a 3-part series, and we'll be touching on our last part on the 12th. And then the LA chapter, we have another virtual happy hour with the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator that we're really excited for. And please sign up for the newsletter so you can always stay in the know of what's going on with WCS. Next slide, please. All right, so Zoom room etiquette. So you guys kind of know this, right? Stay muted unless you need to unmute during our discussion to speak. Really have your video open. This is really how we're connecting with one another. So have your video on if you can. And then just make sure you put your name, and then also put your LinkedIn in the chat so that way folks can connect with you. Next slide. And just so everyone's aware, we do have a new virtual membership, which is a great opportunity for you to get plugged in with WCS even more and to really take part in the network that we've been able to create. Next slide. All right, so without further ado, our co-host today is the head of fellowship operations at On Deck, an organization helping amazing founders from around the world build the next world-changing companies. On Deck founders have built over 250 companies and raised over $150 million in just 1 year of the fellowship program. In addition, our co-host is also the founder and CEO of the Violet Society, helping female and non-binary people in tech find a support system, community, and mentorship. She was also a UX designer and product manager at Glider, a B2B SaaS software platform for product managers, for Forge, a professional education program for mid-career tech professionals to strengthen hard skills, and assembled a professional social network for the top STEM college students. She co-created Spectra, a hackathon for female and non-binary people, and studied computer science at Tufts University. In her spare time, she enjoys Bollywood dance, reading science fiction, and trying vegetarian recipes. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to our co-host, Sharia Navatia. Hey,
Thanks
Sharia.
so much, Neil. Thanks for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here and so excited to meet everyone here from Women in Clean Tech. So I'd love to share a little bit more about why this book is really important and why tackling this problem is really important. So next slide, please. So just talking about kind of where we are right now with the diversity problem in clean tech and the technology industry as a whole. Women, as we know, are severely underrepresented in both of these industries. And that's why we have an organization like this. And that's why I think that it's really important to have organizations based on gender identity, racial identity, and other segments of people's identities which are underrepresented in technology. Just to share a little bit more, some other statistics. So Green Tech America's 2019 solar workforce study said that the solar workforce is 73% white, whereas the country itself is 60% white, and 9% Asian, 8% African American, and 17% Hispanic, compared to the entire country is 18% Hispanic, 13% African American, and 6% Asian. The diversity stats are even worse the higher up you go. As we know, the majority of leadership positions across many industries are dominated by white men. 88% of senior solar executives are white. So the wind industry's workforce is similarly skewed. 69% of the industry's workers are white. And we know that this is a problem across many different white-collar industries. In technology in particular, this slide shows a few more data points about why there's such a large problem. There's a variety of different factors that go into this problem across different stages of people's careers. From early on, it's a kind of like this pipeline problem is often mentioned in different discussions about diversity and representation. Even if you look all the way back to middle school and high school, female students are taking math and science classes at a lower rate than male students. They're getting lower scores. They don't see themselves in a math or science job. But if you go back to elementary school, before people have kind of absorbed many of the societal expectations, it's a lot more equitable. And so we know that it's not about people's potential, and it's really more about stereotype threat, their own expectations of themselves and the people around them pushing their expectations on them, and things like that. And so I think that it's really important that we talk about this issue openly, especially with people who may not be underrepresented and don't understand the problem because they don't experience it firsthand. So in the next slide, we have a little bit more. So here's some of the barriers experienced by women in technology: lack of mentors, lack of female role models, gender bias in the workplace, unequal opportunities to growth, and unequal pay for the same skills. I don't know if everybody's been able to see a lot of the public movement around equal pay day. There's an equal pay day for women. There's also equal pay days for Black women and Hispanic women in particular. And they're set on the days to show the amount of extra time it would take somebody to work to make the same amount. So it's kind of like if it would take a year and 7 months to make the same amount as a man in that year, the equal pay day is set for like 7 months into that year. And so I think that those are great holidays to recognize in your workplace with your friends, and just call attention and light to those issues so that more of us can work towards solving them. A couple more stats that I wanted to share. In 2019, less than 3% of all venture funding went to women-led companies, and over 90% of decision makers at VC firms are men. And so this is a ridiculous stat. Can't imagine that in a country where it's 50-50 male and female, less than 3% of venture funding is going to women. And so this is something that I think it would be really valuable if all of us could work together. I think Arlan is really an important force in helping drive this change and close this gap. For Black women in particular, the number of Black women who have raised over $1 million is a countably small number. It's about 35 people, which is really frustrating and disappointing, and something that I think Arlan has had a huge hand in helping solve. So on the next slide, I'd love to just share more with everyone here about my own work and why I'm really passionate about this subject. So first off, the Violet Society. I started this organization when I was back in college in 2013. And really what I was trying to solve was I saw the pipeline problem right in front of me. In college itself, I started off as a math major and then switched to computer science. And because I had switched a year in, I felt like I was already kind of excluded from the different startup and tech spaces, communities, and friend circles. I couldn't break in as a sophomore, even if I was just trying to go through a club, which I thought was a little bit ridiculous. And then when I talked to the sole, like there were maybe 5 women in a comp sci class and then 55 guys. And I would talk to them and ask like, hey, have you heard of like starting startups? Are you interested in starting your own? they really didn't want to. They said, oh, maybe I'll do it after college, after I've worked at a big company, and then I want to work at a startup, and then maybe I'll start my own. And people, I felt like, were really counting themselves out of opportunities because they didn't feel those role models or support. And I felt really strongly that if we banded together and we helped one another, we would be able to go much farther together and we wouldn't feel so insecure. There were definitely times during class when I would have a question that now looking back was perfectly reasonable, but at the time it seems too basic, so I wouldn't ask it. And then I would just wait and a male student would ask it and wouldn't feel bad at all. I had other times that someone would look down that I didn't know something or brag that they were coding since they were 12, and then I would get a better grade than them on a test. And so I think that a lot of it is just this kind of like confidence and entitlement, which Arlan talks about in her book, and we'll be able to go over that a little bit more in the book. So after starting Violet, when I was an undergrad, I restarted it back in 2018 as a fellowship program. And so we ran 7 batches of founder, product manager, and engineering programs with nearly 100 alums. This was a 40-hour program that Natalie was part of, one of the people here from WCS today. It's you create like really deep lifelong friendships and deep connections with the other people who are in the program, and that was a lot of the goal. It was so that people can feel like they have that community and connection around them of other people who are female and non-binary who are in technology. And to share a little bit of where I am now, I recently joined the On Deck Fellowship team about 4 months ago, and so the On Deck Fellowship is this amazing organization started by Eric Torenberg, who was the first employee at Product Hunt. So what he did was he saw that a lot of people who wanted to start companies or new things, it would be confidential that they were working on something new. And so they wouldn't really be able to share it publicly. But at the same time, they needed to find co-founders and early investors. So he started throwing these on-deck dinners where a VC firm would sponsor a dinner. It was fully confidential. And then you would invite people who were potential co-founders and potential early investors. They would meet each other, and even just through those events, because they were so curated, a lot of new companies sprung up, including one like Carrot Fertility, if you've heard of that. And then from a year or 2 of those expanding around the world, Eric decided to turn this into a formal fellowship program. So now we run these 10-week fellowship programs, just starting last summer in 2019. They started in the Bay Area and New York City, and now since COVID, we're fully remote, and so we have fellows from across the globe. It's a super diverse network of people. We're increasing global access to Silicon Valley networks and capital with over 1,000 alums in a founder program, an angel investor program, and then some new writer and podcaster fellowships. So would definitely encourage anyone here who might be interested in that to check those out. Next slide. Yes. Cool. So I'd love to just talk a little bit more about Arlan and why she's amazing and why we're all here. So this is Arlan Hamilton. If you haven't read much about her story, this is her on the cover of Fast Company. She was actually the first non-entertainer Black woman to be on the cover of Fast Company ever. Oprah was on the cover, Serena Williams was on the cover, but nobody from tech or a business leader was on the cover until Arlan. She really is a huge trailblazer. And this, as you see, is her book. And then the other picture here is a bunch of people from Backstage Capital. She grew this gigantic network of portfolio companies, supporters, her team over the past 5 years. So a little bit more about Arlan. She is a Black queer woman, and she wanted to see more people succeed in tech who looked like her and who were underrepresented. Because of her intersectional identity, she understood so many of the challenges that people who aren't underrepresented may not have been able to experience firsthand, and thus don't understand the severity of. Her background was actually not in tech at all. Usually the conventional wisdom is that you have to be a founder first before you can be an investor, but she was in the music industry. She ran an indie magazine. She was a tour manager for musicians for years. And then she was totally inspired and decided that she would be a fantastic venture capitalist. And she just read up a ton. She read up books, she read on the internet, and she just studied in order to make herself money before she got money, which is one of her early points in the book, which I think is really great. And yeah, so Backstage Capital, her VC fund, has raised over $7 million and invested in over 130 startups. It also includes Backstage Studio, which is their venture studio incubating new startup ideas, and the Backstage Accelerator, a 3-month program. Before COVID, it was based in LA, Philadelphia, London, and Detroit. So next slide. Cool, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about just the book itself. So if you haven't been able to read it yet, I would strongly recommend it. A lot of It's About Damn Time is about her own personal life journey, everything that she's learned and accomplished and created throughout her life. So she talks about even much before she started the fund, she talks about being a tour manager, and she just has a lot of wisdom to impart, having overcome so many different challenges in her life, and really living to tell the tale and show kind of taking her story back into her own hands. Towards the end, she talks about how some journalists have maybe misrepresented her because they like to have this story of somebody just like shooting up and then cutting them down. And I think that Arlan is a great example of someone who has really been able to take their story back and say, like, this is what really happened. This is who I really am. I'm human. This is what's went right, and this is what's went wrong. So in 2015, Arlan was on food stamps. She was sleeping on the floor of the San Francisco airport. She said in many interviews that she would take meetings with investors in hotel lobbies so that they couldn't tell that she didn't have an office and that she didn't have a home, because it would look fancy and they would think it was reasonable and be like, oh, she's staying at this fancy hotel here, of course. But really, she was sleeping on the floor of SFO so that she had a place to sleep. And I'd love to just like some of the main key points. Like I mentioned earlier, becoming money. This is Arlan's idea that's just like, don't wait around until you're qualified. Don't wait for somebody to hand you the information. We all have Google now. Even if you have to go to a library, look things up, just like start learning and start studying, because you have to really know your stuff forwards and backwards, especially if people look at you and don't expect you to know your stuff. Then you really have to know it double so that you can prove them wrong and you can say, no, I do know what I'm talking about. This is why I would be amazing for this. This is why I'm highly qualified to speak on this. Another part that she talks about is relationships. She tells a story in the book that was really amazing where she took pictures with a ton of people. I'm trying to remember why. She wanted to like take pictures with, I think, 1,000 people or 10,000 people in order to sell more of her magazine. And I think that Arlan has really learned throughout the years the importance of creating really authentic relationships. So I think that one thing that's really valuable during events like this is remembering that networking is not a dirty word. It's really just creating authentic relationships with people, a strong give and take, getting to know them and them getting to know you in a way that feels natural to both of you, as if you're just friends helping each other out, rather than making something that's really transactional. Third thing is resilience. Arlan is an amazing example of resilience. She really continuously bounces back whenever anything goes wrong. It's not about the number of failures, it's about how quickly and how well you bounce back. And then authenticity. Arlan shows up really authentically, and you can tell from her podcast, her written interviews, her Twitter, her Instagram. She's really honest about who she is, and because she's so honest and authentic with others, that really attracts others to be honest and authentic back to her. And then the next slide, we'll talk about the rest of the book. Cool. So with creativity, she's really talking about just like using a lot of determination and tenacity to break past barriers, even if you're not sure how you otherwise might. Confidence, I think, is one that's really key for Arlan. She says, don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 10. This is something that will frequently happen in technology and other competitive industries. It might look like everybody else is getting funding, everyone else is getting customers. Like, what am I doing? I'm not there yet. How do I get on like Forbes 30 under 30? Like, what am I doing wrong? But I think that a lot of Arlan's advice is really important to take a step back and say, where have I been and where am I going? And am I on the path that I want to be on, rather than saying, oh my God, I'm not there yet, let me just give up. Another thing, self-care. I think that this is great. It sounds like, honestly, this is one of those things where I could feel her saying, you all should have more self-care, while also acknowledging that she doesn't make enough time for it herself. Because she mentioned one time, my wife and I took a 2-day vacation. And I was like, you should have taken a 5-day vacation. You should have taken a 10-day vacation, Arlan, like you deserve it. But really, she's just kind of going against this like hustle porn culture. So if anybody follows Gary Vee, he's one of the people that people mention a lot about, just like hustle, hustle, hustle all the time. You have to work all day, work all night, never sleep. And that's just not sustainable. And so I think Arlan has a really important message there, that you have to build some kind of system that's sustainable for you, where you're working hard, but you're not burning yourself out. And then finally, the big picture is just like, I think that one thing that's amazing about what she's done over these past 5 years is she had a vision of, I want to create something where I am helping fund underrepresented people until I work my way out of a job. I want to make it so that Backstage Capital doesn't have to exist anymore, because funding is equitable for everyone, regardless of their identity. And she had this big vision, and she's clearly working towards it. And she's inspired so many others. I was building in the diversity and tech space before Arlan. And I think that since she's come onto the scene and like burst on more prominently, there's been a huge uptick in the momentum of the movement, and she really has had the impact that she set out to have. And so keep that big picture in mind for whatever you're building and creating, so that you keep working towards that grand vision. But I know that was a big monologue. I hope that it was helpful, interesting, and inspiring, and I'd love to pass it back to Camille before we go into our breakout rooms.
Thank you so much, Sharia. And one of the reasons why I was really excited for the LA chapter that we chose this book is because one of the things that we lack within our industry are we need more businesses, right? We need more ideals, we need more innovations, and we need more like female and non-binary founded companies. And so like if you yourself, maybe you're already in the industry, but maybe you're working for a company and you have an ideal, like we really wanted to utilize this book to say, hey, you may have what it takes in order to like start your own company, and here are resources, you know, that may be helpful in order for you to do that. My personal story before I jump into the breakout is I worked for a company for 4 years, and just in January, I took some of the information that I saw, like, you know, holes in our industry, and was able to apply that and start my own company within clean tech. So we hope that at the end of this discussion, like that's something that you either walk away with, or you can like talk to other people about the opportunity that we have here in this industry. All right, so without further ado, we would love to get you on to breakout rooms in order to discuss some of the things that came up inside of Arlan's book. Your facilitators will also have these questions written out as well in Google Docs, so don't worry if you don't capture everything. But we have 3 different quotes here. The first quote talks about privilege and just understanding that like everyone has some sort of privilege. And the question here is like, how can you use your privilege to uplift others in everyday life? The next part is kind of like what we talked about before. It's like really taking transferable skills in order to apply it into a new industry. So how can we create our own opportunities when people won't give them to us? And how can we create them for others? The last quote here has a lot to do with just like being yourself and being comfortable with being yourself. So how can we be unapologetically authentic in our places of work and in everyday life? And so with that, we'll be zooming off into our breakout rooms. And I look forward to having you all come back here to do a share out. Take us away. Kind of like, you know, have somebody move you to another space. It just feels like, oh, I'm here for it. So it's like a little rocket ship. Like, thanks. Here we go. I hope everyone had a good time in their breakout rooms. We're going to do a share out. And I'm gonna have my group go first because I was really excited about what someone said. And so we're gonna have Janice. She spoke to that second quote that talks about like really making your own. And so she's gonna share a story that related to that quote. So thank you, Janice, for offering up to share your story. I will turn it over to you.
Hi, my name is Janice. Kind of nervous now, but basically I've been in the solar industry for 11 years in an R&D company for tooling, and we were put on the market, were purchased by our customer, currently SunPower. And when they decided to buy our company, I was part of the contract to be brought over to the new company. When I received my offer letter, I was basically demoted. My salary was changed to hourly, which could work in a way where I could potentially make more money. But being a single mom, I had to think about my monthly paycheck and what was coming in. And then my title had changed. I think I mentioned that. But when it came time to speak to the CEO and the head of HR and tell them whether or not I was gonna take the offer, I told them no, no, and no. I told them obviously they didn't know what I did at the company, or my position wasn't relayed properly to them, because if they knew, then they would understand that without me, basically the company wouldn't function. So I basically negotiated with them a few months, for them to give me a few months to be able to create my own position, as and after that time, I'm able to create my own title and negotiate my pay rate. Um, right now, I've been just networking with people in different divisions, asking them questions about what they do and how it relates to my current position, just getting advice and building my network.
No, thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, like when she told that story, I was like, this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Like sometimes people are not going to give you that opportunity, and that doesn't mean that like you can't try to figure it out yourself, right? And so I thank you for sharing that, and I hope that like spoke to someone in this room. Like if there is something that's happening in your workplace or just like in your life in general, like sometimes you just got to speak up and create those own spaces for yourself. So I commend you for doing that, Anjali. So thank you so much for sharing. That was amazing. Okay, who would like to share? Next person. Let's see. You can just talk. You can raise your hand, but then you can also just unmute and talk. That also works. Okay, Cassandra. Oh, Natalie, Cassandra. Okay.
No, Cassandra, go first.
Go ahead, Cassandra.
Oh, well, yeah, I must have. At the end of us, where got cut off, we were just talking about being your authentic self at work and how can we overcome barriers when two people's authentic selves are different. Like I learned at work recently, a lot of people, especially South American cultures, really want to hug and embrace and touch. And me personally, I don't like to be touched. It's not something I'm used to. But or one of the other people in our group, just German, that's very efficient, doesn't want to do a lot of small talk. And so two people are opposed, and do we have to be very open about those differences in order to overcome them? And it's something I think that isn't brought up enough.
No, that's so true. I think sometimes we think that like if we tap into these things of like being ourselves or like having our bringing our full selves to our workplace, that like it's gonna be like all peachy, but like conflict is like also okay, right? And the more that we're like open and try to be our authentic selves and like also coming from a place of understanding ourselves and also understanding the other person, it helps. But like just because people are showing up as themselves doesn't mean that it's just gonna be like rainbows and like butterflies. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very good point. We have time for probably like two more. Oh, Natalie, did you have something else?
Yeah, I was just going to share, I was in a group with Megan, Britt, and Aaron, and I just wanted to share some of what we talked about. We talked about using our privilege to uplift others, and I thought Britt and Aaron had some good stories. So Britt was talking about how she works in the film industry and how, just having the privilege of having a college degree kind of allowed her to get information about people's like salaries, and that helped her to, and she shared some of that information with others, and basically it revealed to them like, oh my gosh, I'm not making nearly enough as my colleague, and like just leveraging that information allowed them to get raises. So that was one example. And then Erin was talking about, you know, her background and how she came from, you know, her background is she went through some hardships, and she's learned just recently to be open about those and to tell people about them. And it kind of fits exactly into another one of Arlan's sort of recommendations about being your authentic self so that other people can find you. You know, if you don't talk about these things, a person who has gone through that same experience will never know. I thought those were two really great stories I want to share.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I always love when Arla says that, like, be your authentic self so that other people can find you. Because that was one of the reasons why I was like, yo, Janice, share, because you don't know, there might be another person in here that like needs to hear your story, and like that, then she shared. So that's like super cool. Do we have anyone else? Yes, Erin. Oh, so we can go, everyone. Go ahead, Erin.
Like, being your authentic self is not only so important. I love that you said conflict is okay. I love conflict because I think what usually comes out the other side is great. But how many of you here have been like corrected by predominantly like older white men for being yourself? Like, oh, yeah. I mean, and I just think like the more we can push against that, the less conformity there's going to be, and the more space there is for us to be ourselves. And I don't know, that's probably like my biggest takeaway, is that just permission to be exactly myself. And I don't know, it's worked out for me so far, but only recently when I started owning it.
Erin, in our breakout session, sorry, but I just had to say this, that I was in a meeting earlier today with Michael Squared, and there's 2 Michaels on the call, and I had to make sure that they knew that I was not going to be talked over, period. Like, I'm not finished. I'm going to finish. You need to hear what I got to say, because I'm going to answer the questions that you're thinking about in your brain if you would just shut your mouth, basically. Like, so I really liked what Arlan had to say too in the book about privilege versus entitlement. And that was one of the things that I talked about, because, you know, some people can look at me and they're like, oh, who is this Latina girl? She doesn't have privilege, but I do. And I grew up here in Silicon Valley in Santa Clara with the privilege of having Apple, IBM, and all of these high-tech businesses around us flooding our schools with all this technology. And there's a big difference between having privilege and utilizing it and maximizing it, and then being entitled and browbeating and making people feel bad about maybe because they're not from where you're from. And so I really liked how she gave that perspective, because all of us have privilege. It's really how we look at it. You know, from where we grew up, or how our parents were, or our family upbringing. Some of us may have one mom or one dad, or maybe none. That's a privilege too, in a sense, because you learn how to fight through certain things that maybe some of us didn't have to endure. And so I just really loved how she talked about that in the book. That hit home for me. I mean, I talked about it after like it was my own thought.
No, I love that. Yes. The one thing I'll say, like, so my career started off in banking. And so it's very like, you know, kind of like everything's very strict. And then when I moved into tech, I think when I like started, to your point, Erin, like giving myself permission to be myself, like half of the guys literally would be like walking around the office with like without shoes, like board shorts. When they're in meetings, like they sit back, kick their feet up, and like they were just being themselves. And I'm like, oh, I can do that too. You know what I mean? So it's like getting into these spaces, and you see like there is a lot of folks that like these, you know, a lot of these men, like they're just their full selves, and like people accept it. So I think that that's where I started to give myself the permission to be like, I want to show up as my full self, because I know that I'll be able to add more value, right? When I really care about something and I'm really like here with you and trying to, be authentic in that, right? And so, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Erin and Sarah. I think we have time for one more. There were so many hands a moment ago, and I think I missed the hand. Melanie.
Mine's quick. So we talked in our group, actually Lauren brought this up, and she was actually like, do you ever wish that certain people wouldn't be their authentic selves? And And I was like, yes, absolutely, yes. Like, I feel that women and people of color are always filtering ourselves, you know, like not letting our authentic selves be true. And then there's folks on the other side of the spectrum, like maybe the folks who take their shoes off and put their feet up, like in the cafeteria or something gross like that. Like, yeah, I think like it's interesting to see like who in our society feels totally comfortable being their authentic self, even when it might not be, or I don't know, it might be preferable to maybe filter certain traits.
Yeah, I think it probably definitely has to come with like you're being your authentic self, but you're mindful of like your community and folks around you, and you're also, like we said, like you're gonna have conflict. You're gonna have people who's gonna disagree with you, and we have to be in community with one another. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day. So no, that was a really good point. We can do one more, or we can go to the next set of questions. Yes, Megan.
I think to kind of go off that community thing a little bit, I have worked in finance, and like as a woman, it is tough. It is, you know, it's a boys' game, it's a boys' world. But I recently moved into taxation, and I got so lucky with my manager. She's like truly my inspiration, and she's been so supportive to me as a woman moving up in my industry, and pushes me to be the best person that I can be and to be my authentic self. And I think that we need to be able to support each other into accepting ourselves for who we are, and being able to grow, you know, even if we're not comfortable doing it ourselves. You're allowed to rely on other people, and you're allowed to allow other people to help you. And I've just been so grateful for that, and to have a community of women that help me. And honestly, I was so lucky to stumble upon this webinar, because I think this is awesome to have women be able to talk about things like this. I think it's wonderful. So thank you so much for having this also.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's a great transition into the breakout. Thank you so much, Megan. Okay, can I get the questions on the screen? I see Aurora has a thinking face, so I think it's happening. Okay. She's like, I'm doing it. I'm definitely doing it. Okay, here we go. Started sharing. Yes, breakout 2. Oh, okay, here we go. All right, so our next set of questions are going to be around imposter syndrome. So I know this is something I've gone through. And it actually is kind of like delves into the whole like being your authentic self. I think those are tied hand in hand with the imposter syndrome. Then the other quote has to do with how can we create work environments that allow everyone to thrive, and actually just basically touched on what we just heard just now, and even started to think about like what are we doing, you know, in positions of power in order to help other folks, you know, be a part of this our industry or our business. And then the last question is here: how do we translate our success to serve as a model for others? Oh my gosh, I love that. That's a really good one. Okay, so buckle in. We're gonna travel back into our breakout rooms. I think we're probably gonna have new people, so definitely introduce yourselves. Once again, this is about networking and figuring out how we can support one another as well. And then we'll come back, do a share out, and then we'll wrap up. All right, take us away. I literally thought everyone left. There was like 6 people in the room. I was like, oh, I guess it's over. I'm glad you came back. Thanks. Okay, let's hop right into it. Who wants to chat? Who wants to go? Oh, I see a hand. Melanie and Adamson. There's a lot of Melanies in here. You can go. For my group.
Hi. So we had a really great discussion in our group, and it was really about, I think if there was one central theme, it was about building trust. And I think Janice said it really great when she said, you know, you're building trust with people at all levels, whether it's the person who is, you know, the cleaning up the bathrooms to the CEO. You know, we're trying to build trust, and that's all about meeting people where they're at, listening to them, taking the time to listen to them, being really engaged, and then also thinking about events that are not just about drinking, because, you know, it's easy and we're accustomed to that, but, you know, it's not for everyone. And, you know, there could be more discussions or more events that around different things, different activities But really, it's, you know, at the end of the day, it was really about building trust and listening to other people.
Thank you so much for sharing. Who wants to go next? Okay, Megan.
Just to kind of play off that, I'm so glad you said without drinking. I was in a fireside chat with Frida Apple yesterday, who's like a big time Silicon Valley girl. And that's the one thing she said. She's like, all the boys want to go out and drink, but I never felt comfortable going out to drink. I never felt like I was one of the boys, but I also felt like just didn't really want to do it. I didn't want to really be around boys and alcohol all the time. So I'm really, really glad you said that, actually, because that's a huge thing that keeps coming up with these, you know, high profile women, but also, you know, younger women like myself. I don't really want to go out with 30 boys from the office. It's just not really comfortable for me. Like, if I'm going to go drink, I want to do it with my girlfriends, or if there are girls in the office, come with me. I don't want to go by myself, you know? So I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. That's really cool. I was thinking about that as well.
Yeah, that was like one of the things I was like, we had to, at my last company, we actually had somebody that had stopped drinking. Like, he was like in a program and everything. So we had to be very mindful of just like having like other stuff there, like not shaming anybody that drink, like, you know, beer is fine or whatever, but then like also having like tea or like sodas, or like just making sure that we were just mindful of like incorporating other beverages. But yes. Anyone else?
Maybe we're starting to talk about the imposter syndrome, and a lot of people mentioned that this is a very common topic people talk about. So in our group, we actually try to get away from that as well at the beginning, at the end, saying that this is way overused, and it's very normal to have those feelings of you might not know what you're doing, especially when you start a new job or right out of college, or in any situation. It is very normal, and taking that fear away and that word of, oh my God, this is a syndrome, and getting lost in it, I think was very important for the whole group. And then we also went into this other side of, well, actually, I think a lot of times the issue is more of, you actually do know what you're talking about, but the other people are not seeing it. And how do you get that across? And how do you make them see? So we talked about that a bit. One way of doing it is just basically explaining how you work, how you function, and making them see in hopefully a one-on-one, this is the way you think about things, and making them see that you actually do know what you're talking about. And the other side is just trying to work your way through of learning in different situations. And Cassandra pointed that one out. It's like, okay, if I define it this way, it doesn't work. So I need to try a new way. And then you just keep learning and learning until that person actually gets the point. And maybe the last one that we had in our discussion was very, very funny, actually, in a way. Who didn't have that feeling of, hold on a second, that was my idea that you just said, you just rephrased it differently. Also a very big point, I think, that females probably haven't. That was not me that said that, by the way. Don't want to have that.
Oh my goodness, I've totally had that. But one of the coolest things, though, I was in a meeting. So for a long time at my last company, I was always like the only woman that was like in an executive, like higher level position. And I had said an idea, and then they like completely just went over me. And then the guy next to me said it, but then one of my friends who's a guy, he was like, you know, Camille literally just said that. And my founder was like blush red, because he was like, I didn't even know. Like, it was just weird. I was like, you really didn't hear me. But it's just so interesting that he was like, yo, I really didn't know she just said it. But it took this other guy to be like, yo, she literally just said that. So definitely have had that happen. And I love that you brought up just like figuring out communication styles. I think a lot of times, because like, just people who aren't normally in the room, once you become in the room, you may see things from a different perspective. So it may be harder for other folks to understand like where you're coming from, because they literally can't, you know what I mean? And so I love the ideal of trying to figure out your communication style, or trying to like reframe things so folks can have an understanding of what you're saying. So I love that you brought that up. We have time for about two more. Go ahead, Sarah.
What was the second question? Because it was something about the work environment, right?
Yeah. How can we create work environments that allow everyone to thrive?
So this is very timely for me. I'm starting my own company right now, and I had this meeting with my executive team, and I asked them this question, which is, what is it that you love to do? And imagine that you get to work in a place that you actually get to do the things that you love. Wouldn't you love to work there all the time? Wouldn't you be happy about the money and the time that you're trading for that money? Because some of us right now do not get to do that. And I think that when us as leaders or us as business owners that are on the call and us as executives or leads in our companies, I think we need to be able to extract that out of our teams and find out what are those things that an individual loves to do, because someone in this room loves to do something that I don't like to do. And so what that does is that it allows us to be our authentic self, and as well be working efficiently and have a couple things where the people are loving their job, they're excited about their job, they're having fun at their job, and the time's going by fast. How many of you have been at work and you're like, oh man, I had a great day? That's probably because you were doing something that you loved that day. And then you remember that day that you're like, gosh, it's going by so fast. Can this day go over? That's because you're probably doing stuff that you don't love to do. Now, there's going to be some things that we have to do that we don't get to love, but I think that that's something us as women that we can extract from the people and our coworkers and find out what it is, those things that our coworkers and our teams that love to do, because then we're going to find out someone in the room really loves Excel spreadsheets, someone in the room really loves organizing, someone in the room really loves public speaking, and then you get to delegate all those things to each other. And then you're like, oh my God, we're great. We're the biggest, best family, work family in the world. And then your team's just going to be so happier. And I don't know about you, but I think fun is one of the best ways to bring a good work community together. And just really just asking, it may sound corny and it may sound sentimental, but at the same time, you're going to get some really good data.
No, you're so right. And number one, congratulations on starting your own company. Love it.
Thanks, Fran.
And like to your point, why I'm always like, oh my gosh, we need more female founders in clean tech is because of what you brought up. I think that when you come from a position where like you haven't always been treated fairly, or like you've had things be a little weird, you're more aware, right? Because you have to be. So you're a little bit more aware of how do you create different teams. And so when we talk about, how do you take things that to turn them into your advantage, like the whole point of this talk, it's just that. It's like you probably were in a situation where like you didn't get to do what you loved and you wish it would have changed, but now you have your own company and so you're doing that. So I call out again, like if you have an inkling of starting a business, please do. Like we need you, we need you, we need you. And we have time for 2 more comments. Yes, Casey or Cassie? I don't want to mess up your name. Cassie, all right.
Sarah, what you just brought up also really reminded me about the need for emotional intelligence of bringing that into organizations. I think so often we look at the hard skills. How many years of experience do you have? How often have you done this? How have you delivered this? But there's a level within business that I think is just missed by so many organizations, and that's just recognizing others and creating a level of motivation by saying, hey, so-and-so did an excellent job at X, Y, or Z, and doing it in a public way of recognizing them. I think that really allows people to thrive, because whether it's a small win or a big win, it's fuel for your own, your own mental fuel to go, wow, like someone else saw what I did and that I did a good job, and it's motivating to like do the next thing and push the boundary a little bit further. And so I think that's something else that, just people in business, we need to do a better job of recognizing others and, pushing people up by just saying, great job.
You're so right. And I think that like if we want to have, you think about just like having like really successful businesses, it's businesses where people are happy to go to work, they're compensated fairly, right? And they're placed on teams that like adapt, that is in line, right? It's a win-win situation. It's like, how do you create these win-win situations? And that's how you get people to go above and beyond. I think any position that I've ever had where I've like really did my greatest is like when all of those things were in alignment. So thank you so much for bringing that up. We do have opportunity for one more share out before we wrap up. Anybody else has anything that they would like to share?
maybe if no one has to share, I just wanted to add on to that one because it also just happened in my company, that I realized that a lot of people celebrate each other within their bubbles, within their departments, or the people that they always work together with. But I remember the first time an engineer, I'm in marketing, an engineer said, Marika, I love working with you because you are always a whatever, right? That felt so much better than if my own boss had said I was doing a good job. So we need to watch out that we also tell other people that we might not work with a lot of times and make that public, because it kind of, and that's very sad, but it does get a bit of a different recognition if someone else says it other than the person that does it 5 times a day, you know.
No, absolutely. Like, I think one of the things we talk about just like being in community, like at these companies, like we sometimes we spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our own family, right? And so like making sure that there's like cross-pollination of like teams, because you know the only way that these companies are surviving is because of everyone, right? And so being able to like recognize folks from different teams, I think is so important. With that, can we get the slides back up and I will close us out. This has been so awesome. Thank y'all so much for sticking through all of this. And I'm glad the conversation was as fruitful as it was. Just some upcoming opportunities to work with our co-hosts. So you can join her Facebook community. It's there and the link will go out. Yes, I believe so. Yes, or somebody will put the link into the chat. Subscribe to her mailing list, and then also for On Deck, you know, if you know of a founder that you know that will benefit from this, or you are a founder yourself, or even if you're thinking about it, I promise you, I never ever thought I would start a company. It's very wild to me that I did in January. So even if you're thinking about it, check out On Deck, check out their fellowship. And we also have an Angel Writer podcast and more fellowships launching. So definitely stay in tune with them. Next slide, please. And then join us in the virtual world. Follow us on all of the channels. Follow our co-hosts on all of the channels. And I think that's the last slide, right, Aurora? Yes, maybe? Yes. All right. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you for contributing to this conversation. Please add myself on LinkedIn. Like, let's stay connected. There's a lot of resources out there right now for people to start their own businesses, to be supported. Definitely join the WCS community if you haven't. And if you're based in LA, we are currently looking for members and volunteers. Whenever the world opens back up, we will see each other live. But once again, thank y'all. I appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate each of you. And I hope you all have a great evening.